is just fantastic. Hello everyone, welcome back to a Megon 2 Electric Boogaloo. Today I'd like to talk about Nancy Crampton Brophy, and while what we're going to discuss would seem to be somewhat halls of injustice worthy, I think this is stupid enough and somewhat ironic enough that it warrants its own video, without the halls of injustice being involved. Nancy is a self-published romance writer, and it is some of her own works that make this, what she has done, a tad ironic. Nancy's husband, Daniel Brophy, was a chef who on the 2nd of June 2018 was found inside the Oregon Culinary Institute having a gunshot wound in the back and one in his chest. It took the police 3 months to then arrest Nancy on the charge of murder, which then later became second-degree murder. Since then, she has remained in prison, which would certainly give off the impression that perhaps there is a lot of evidence against her. The trial itself began on April the 4th in Portland, with prosecutors arguing that during the case that Nancy was motivated by money and a life insurance policy. Nancy, though, denied this, saying that she had no reason to kill her husband because their financial problems had largely been solved by cashing in a chunk of one of theirs retirement savings plan. It says Brophy, I don't know which one. Let's assume the husband though. Things though do get a little bit trickier though for Nancy, and that comes from her own cellmate Andrea Jacobs, because Nancy couldn't help but open her mouth, and when she opened her mouth to her cellmate, she may have let slip what actually happened. So what happened? Well, according to Andrea, she told me that he was shot 2 times to the heart, and that she showed me the distance, with Andrea holding out her arms to signify the distance between the woman and her husband. Prosecutors also pointed out that Nancy owned the same make and model of gun that was used to kill her husband. She was also seen on surveillance camera footage driving to and from the Culinary Institute. Interesting to note though, the police never found the gun that killed Daniel Brophy, with the police firmly believing that Nancy had swapped out the barrel of the gun used in the shooting and then discarded it. Her defense had painted the prosecution's case throughout the proceedings as being solely based on circumstantial evidence, and highlighted their client's marriage as one of love. When the prosecution indicated that money could well be a motivator, there is a point to that, because the insurance policy for Daniel was worth $1.4 million US, so about £1 million. But the defense's counter to that was that Nancy's finances deteriorated after Daniel Brophy's death, which should be an indicator that the claim of profit from ill-gotten gains isn't true. To the charge of murder and of course later second-degree murder, Nancy had pled not guilty. The argument of circumstantial evidence falls a little flat when forensics line up with when Nancy was seen on camera at relevant traffic stops. Her husband was believed to have been killed around 7:30 a.m. while preparing for work. She was seen on cameras. So is that circumstantial? No, it shows she was in the vicinity. The coincidence that she owned the same gun, this one becomes a bit trickier because it could well have been the same gun with a barrel replaced, but I'm not a gun expert on that one. So whether there's any validity to that, well, we'll just put it for circumstantial for now, shall we? The fact that Andrea Jacobs, her own cellmate, had testified against her because, well, she did tell her, does not help Nancy in the slightest. And after a brief digging, I did find Andrea Jacobs had been sentenced to 4 years for a number of fraud-related crimes. So chances are what she gained from that would be good behavior and out in a little less time. Earlier I mentioned that Nancy Brophy was a prolific, self-published author. A bone of contention throughout the entire thing was an essay that she wrote in 2011. And this is what makes the whole situation somewhat ironic. The essay was titled How to Murder Your Husband and was published on the C. Jane Publish blog. This contentious 2011 essay, which has been an ongoing point of intrigue both for online spectators and throughout the trial, contains a list of possible motives for murdering your spouse. The first would be financial, proving to be the most suspect to the prosecution in relation to Nancy Brophy. And just to read a passage from that essay, divorce is expensive, and do you really want to split your possessions? Or if you married for money, aren't you entitled to all of it? During the introduction of that same blog post, she wrote, "As a romantic suspense writer, I spend a lot of time thinking about murder, naturally, and consequently, about police procedure. After all, if the murder is supposed to set me free, I certainly don't want to spend any time in jail." Now I should insert now, because it would be intellectually honest of me, the judge discounted this essay because it was written long before the act was committed, 7 years to be precise. With money being considered the motivating factor, what else then would indicate that Nancy could well have been the murderer? Well, for one, Daniel Brophy had not been robbed after he had been killed. If someone was going to shoot him, surely they would take his cell phone, car keys obviously, and wallet. No, none of that was taken. He was dropped, and the person had left. Nancy herself, after she was declared initially not a suspect, was able to claim $40,000 from the insurance policy. Prosecutors later found out that she was able to claim up to $350,000. That argument of dire bank accounts was, though, nixed by the defense's forensics, who pointed out that her accounts were not as dire as they were painting. So how did this end, you ask? Nancy Brophy was found guilty of second-degree murder. Andrea Jacobs, just for the sake of it, is now at a prison camp in Texas, Federal Institute. Nancy is looking at a 25-year sentence, which she'll be sentenced for on the 13th of June. What made this all quite interesting for me, and I'm sure for many, was that she had written an essay, and her own future became art imitating life. When it comes to the sentences for anyone who takes their husband, yes of course, or wife, or children, the sentence is always for me going to be life. But I would like to know what you all think about this, so do let me know down below.